Morning, everyone. I'm just getting myself together here, and I will be with you momentarily. Uh, I am sorry I did not send out a notice for this week. The reason is that MailChimp has changed their methodology, and I am still at odds with that methodology. Uh, and so just remember that every week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we operate this group, and and I will do my best to be here every week. And I apologize for not sending you the notice, but if you come to YouTube, you will be able to get here, and uh, that's the important thing. And if you want to join us in our panel on YouTube, I'm sorry, on Zoom, you can do so by coming to a link which I'm going to provide you in one moment as soon as I find it. Okay, let's see. We've had a lot of changes lately. I got new backup uh, drives so that um, I would have fresh copies of everything that we're doing. Let me see here. Okay. The MailChimp place to to sign up for notices is here. Whoops, didn't come over. Just a moment. Outsmarted myself, I guess. Um, yeah, there it is. Okay. Now we have it. All right, so that's the place to sign up for notices every week. However, I am currently betwixt and between because MailChimp decided to change their technology. So I haven't figured out the new technology and how I will be able to send you notices. And so anyway, good morning, Art. Good morning, everyone. Um, So we're working with this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. And we are on page, I'm going to start on page 92 and read across from there. And assuming Jordan joins us, let me just see if I have any text message from Jordan. It's entirely possible. Nope. Uh, okay. All right. So we will proceed as normal. And okay, I'm going to start on page 92 of this. This is volume two of this work. And in these early passages, before I do start that, I do want to repeat that we run this class every week at 10 a.m. on YouTube. And sometimes I'm a couple of minutes late, as I was today, but usually we do it in a timely manner, as timely as we can. And I try to send out notices, but when my providers change their systems, I get betwixt and between, and I will try to work out on the MailChimp what it is that I need to do to send out the notices again for next week, I hope. But if I don't, we're still here. So going on. All right. In these earlier passages, the thought of Meister Eckhart is referenced, as it is a number of times throughout his works. Jung was later to write a piece on Eckhart, which is one of his finer contributions to the full integration of the religious and psychological meaning of religious experience and expression. In this work and throughout much of his later writing, Jung's thought is at once theological, philosophical, and psychological, without being reducible to any one of these fragmentations in mind when taken alone. Jung and Eckhart both appreciate the cyclical return of the mind to an identity with its origin and the mind's resonance with such moments of identity in life subsequent to the experience. This union of epistemic, ontological, psychological, and theological truth illustrates the poverty of the contemporary scene, which is divested of a category as encompassing as is Jung's perspective in its resistance to all traditional disciplinary fragmentation into which his psychology might be forced and thus truncated. And for these aha moments, these numinous aha moments, I want to refer everyone to the new series that's on Amazon Prime, which is called L'Étoile. And L'Étoile means the stars, and it's a reference to stars in a ballet. And this is a wonderful series on individuation. All the main characters go through an individuation process in this series. And the lead ballerina is, people think of her as a very difficult woman because she's very demanding of her art throughout. And but then at the end, she runs into a roadblock and she changes her attitude. And so she's working with a choreographer. It's actually a famous choreographer who is playing himself in the series, although only in this episode, I believe. And um, he has laid out all these rational explanations why the star, whose name is Cheyenne, should do things his way. And she comes in and doesn't want to look at any of that. And she says, "That's okay. I understand now." And she gets to work. And he's very shocked because he thought he was going to have to argue and fight with her, but he doesn't have to because she's got it. And she's got it because she's had this aha moment, which is a religious, a philosophical, a psychological, and a religious experience, I would say. And that's more or less how the um, 8-episode series ends, but it's a very impressive series overall, and it it builds up to a crescendo that's really impressive, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing another season of this series. Um, so reading on here. In short, in his early work, aspects of Jung's myth are already compatible with Eckhart, while some tension remains with the total Eckhart more fully appropriated in later works. Eckhart discerned two dimensions in divinity between which he drew a rather stringent difference. Eckhart's God was Trinitarian and imbued with so impassioned an inner life that it was called a boletio, a boiling. In fact, so fervid was the inner boiling that it became an ebolitio, a boiling over. In the beginning, God boiled over. A Jungian wit might say. In the beginning, God boiled over, a Jungian wit might say. The primordial boiling over gave rise both to creation and to the fall. In creation, the existential ego realized it was removed from its source, and this removal became the motive for the drive to its recovery. The experience of a removal from a fontal origin of life as the basis of a drive to its ever fuller reappropriation is at least partially resonant with the suffering derived from Abraxas's reign as the ruler of the world of contradiction and the need to affirm one's unique self in its midst. In Jung's early myth, thought profoundly paradoxical, profoundly paradoxical, the pleroma might well be understood as driven to express itself beyond itself in the life of each individual and creature, all of whom participate in it and its drive to individuation in the self-affirming creature. Thus, the seven sermons to the dead, which appears in Scrutinies in the Red Book. Thus, the seven sermons more than hint at a primordial plenitude, driven to express itself beyond itself as the basis of each individual's drive and burden to realize a measure of divine completion in one's personal completion. This theme is at the core of Jung's answer to Job. Religiously and theologically, it brings up the serious question of the necessity driving the creator to create and to seek its needful completion in the history of human consciousness. Okay, so um, this is a fairly significant idea, the pleroma being that from which everything comes. And one could think of it as um, all potentiality before the Big Bang. And that potentiality build up and build up and build up in a place we do not know. No scientist has ever been able to explain it, but it burst out in the Big Bang, and it came to us in the form of living beings. And we, as far as we know, we're the only living beings in the universe. We've never found another microbe. In fact, one of my friends from NASA tells me that as an exobiologist, that means a biologist about things in outer space, um, her the pinnacle of her career would be to discover any microbe that didn't or have its origin on Earth, um, somewhere in the solar system. So far, that's not happened. All right. So here we are, and we're in the process of, as living beings, of developing over, you know, 13.8 billion years to the point where we can think about this, and we are in the process of expressing um, the work of the Godhead. Richard says, I've always wondered why the spirits today all truly look primordial like frogs in a tadpole stage. Yep, we're all tadpoles. I think we're pretty much tadpoles. Um, we haven't even gotten to the ugly stage yet, although some of us have, I guess. Anyway, however, Eckhart also referred to a different dimension of God, namely Gottheit, or Godhead. It is into the Godhead that the ego is led to the breakthrough, Durchbruch, and to an identity, a total fusion or absorption of the individual with the divine beyond distinction. The total return to this dimension of the divine lies behind Eckhart's twice repeated prayer. I pray to God to rid me of God. This is a crucial point in Jung's later work on Eckhart. It would mean at a certain point in the psyche, every individual is vested with an ontological participation in the being of the divine, and that its attainment would mean unqualified identity with divinity. And Jung makes this explicit in his later essay on Eckhart. Quote, as a result of this retrograde process, the original state of identity with God is established and a new potential is produced. In this line, Jung means psychic identity in a real and literal sense. In the Seven Sermons to the Dead, he is far less radical. Here, a moment of identity without difference is to be avoided as a form of regressive dissolution, destruction of one's progressive individuality, and of that fullness of life that the pleroma demands of everyone. A later Jung could suggest that a moment of identity with the divine, or approximation thereof, is the ground of one's truest affirmation as an individual. And this is what um, I would say about this series, L'Etoile. The um, we're seeing more and more um, Jungian style things appear um, in film and television, for example. And L'Etoile has several characters, all of whom have their numinous moment at one point or another. And it it's going to be very interesting. I mean, they go through the episodes and you see the trials and tribulations they go through. But in the eighth episode, they all have a moment of realization. And so, um, in terms of what the future will be in a second season, I don't know, but it's a really impressive work, this L'Etoile. And I would also commend to you the series called Mozart in the Jungle. Um, and Debbie and I were watching Mozart in the Jungle quite a bit years ago. I don't even remember how many years ago, but we only got through the third season, and this past couple of weeks we discovered that there's a fourth season that we hadn't looked at, and so we've been looking at it lately, and again, similar things are happening, and in terms of realization, and interestingly, they introduce um, in Mozart in the Jungle actual figures who are sort of the brainchild of the various players. So one player is the main conductor of the New York Symphony, and he is having regular conversations with Beethoven and Mozart, for example. And there are many other examples, but Mozart will appear to him, and he's Mozart's physically shown in the series, and then he'll disappear when other people come in. So he's obviously part of the conductor's psyche. He's not physically there, but this is a fundamental thing that Jung was able to do in the Red Book and later on teach us to do, and what's happened to us. Um, so let's see. Good morning, Kathy. There is spirit life all through the universe. In fact, they support all the stars and planets in place, says Richard. Um, and Archiphanes says, we of Adam's crude defiance give ear to the echoes of the howling typhon's reign, not of the morality of the slaves, we the salt of scorching earth. Yep, I guess. All right, so let's see. Anyway, when I speak of the divine, I know that I know what I'm speaking of, but if you have to believe, um, then you don't yet know. Okay. And what I'm saying about these two television series is that they show characters who are going through the processes in their own lives, in their experiences in the world, which lead them to um, a numinous revelatory uh, experience, and it changes them and it makes them understand who they are in the greater scheme of things. Um, and the saint Richard says the saints of antiquity never saw them as primordial, but as angels or people in spirit form, uh, divine or demonic. Well, they could have been either, of course, and I just refer you to my like 5 second experience with Mephistopheles. Um, so it can be a demonic creature, um, and it can seem very real in the moment. And I'm sure it has seemed very real for many people. So, as briefly noted, an added powerful and paradoxical player in the drive to individuality is Abraxas, variously described as the divinity beyond the opposites, and yet as their source and the ruler of their inevitability within this world. A condensation of Jung's attitude toward Abraxas can never be fully satisfactory. Basically, Jung would urge the individual to pursue one's most individual truth in the face of Abraxas and the suffering of the contradictions he imposes on every finite life, in the face of the inescapable conflicts. Abraxas lays on the individual in finitude. One must bow to him, but never at the cost of abandoning one's deepest individual truth and the singularity of life it demands. Yeah. Neither flight nor capitulation is acceptable. Jung suggests that the price Jesus paid in his uh, oppositional subjugation to Abraxas demonstrates the latter's cruelty And yet, in the end, Jesus has distilled the situation into, quote, the beauty of suffering. Okay, the beauty of suffering. We all suffer, and we all live in this field of, one could call it field of dreams, but field of opposites, and we have to learn how to live within those. And I just wanted to point out that among Muslim artists, um, it would be blasphemous to make a perfect work of art. And so um, Muslim artists, either intentionally or unintentionally, um, put a flaw in every work of art that they produce. And I find that I don't have to I don't have to work very hard at it when I do my own art. There certainly is a flaw in it always. Um, and so only God is perfect. And as any physicist would tell you, that there's some infinitesimally small number uh, that if the universe was different by I think it's 0.3%, but it could be 3%. I think it's 0.3% though. If the universe were different by 0.3%, we would never exist and life would not have begun. And therefore, the universe would have no way to look back at itself and be amazed. Cherie says, I was listening to Chopin this morning, the first book my piano teacher ever gave me as a child years ago. Chopin, The Man and His Music by James Hunniker, first edition 1900, copyright 1900, now expired. But in any case, um, some people connect to an amazing life, I would say, and a amazing artistic oeuvre. I wouldn't say that Chopin was the most successful human being that ever lived. He certainly had his flaws, uh, as did Mozart, um, and as did Beethoven, for that matter, and many others. So we all have flaws, and uh, I was just pointing out that for Muslim artists, it's essential to have a mistake in their art out of reverence to, only God is perfect. And so, reading on, the Christian dead to whom these words are addressed rightly perceive their perception of a wholly transcendent and self-sufficient divinity is being undermined and take great umbrage with such a view. Even though they themselves and their age have outgrown such a divinity into a maturity that believes only what it can experience at a lesser level, nonetheless, Philemon/Jung refuses to placate them with a simple replacement of what they have already outgrown. Rather, the preacher proclaims that God is not dead. Quote, he is as alive as ever, unquote. But his life is far different from the life of any God the Christians have understood. In effect, God is manifest in every creature. Jung/Philemon is proposing a universal sacramentality in which every existent participates in the pleroma as its expression, and humanity can and should become aware of it. In later works, Jung will identify the opposites in the pleroma and in their expression, moving to integration in human consciousness. But in this early work, he speaks less of the union of opposites and insists more on a simple awareness of their reality. In fact, he cautions against a too superficial, perhaps too rational, bringing together of Christ and Satan. They're more they're more than intellectual truth is in a medium, quote unquote medium, a more than intellectual coming together. Later, Jung seems to have come to an incipient realization that the opposites not only have to be recognized and acknowledged, but the deeper movement of the psyche is to bring them together. In his essay on the Trinity, he strongly suggests that the light and dark sons of the same Father, Christ and Satan, would move to an embrace or resolution in the psyche and so in history. Already in his Red Book, he is signaling that this unity is not a work of reason, but that of a mediator who unites opposites through a traditional process comparable to a new insight funded by the psyche like a new revelation. And so, I think that's the way I understand it. And that is that I do see that God lives and I can feel God in my being, in my psyche. Um, and I think most people can if they attune to it. And so um, the question is understanding. And unfortunately, the way religions have had to be presented for 3,000 years, let's say, um, was really aimed at what children could believe. And and so we grew up and I certainly was angry as anyone, when the God I was sold in Sunday school didn't turn out to actually exist. But um, but the God that one can know is something else entirely. And so, you know, if you've had this experience, you don't need me to tell you. And if you haven't had the experience, um, then keep searching, I guess is the answer to that. Um, you're still a seeker uh, in some way. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. So again, a more thorough elaboration of Jung Philemon's reflection on the essence of humanity reveals that it may not be as wholly entrapped in finitude as some formulations would insist. As noted, Jung is dealing with a dialectical conception of the essence of humanity as a participant in the pleroma and the pleroma in it. Thus, this side of his understanding of essence is a strong early evidence of Jung's essentialism and Platonic sensitivity. In the elaboration of the pleroma, there is a sense in which it does not exist, and yet it is also given the note of effectiveness, quote unquote. This means that archetypal potentiality drives toward its own realization. This is akin to what Jung was later to appreciate in the mystic Jacob Boehm, namely the drive of God to find manifest expression and, through it, divine self consciousness in creation and human consciousness. Every individual becomes an expression of the pleroma. Such expression is one's truest essence. The conclusion is that each human is potentially divine, and that the process of maturation and individuation is to move to the making of this potentiality real in the process of living life to its fullest. We will return to an elaboration of this conception in the sixth sermon, where it is related to a blue star or light grounded in the pleroma, following and leading the individual through life's journey as gently but forcefully supporting the individual's deepest truth. Okay. uh, so Sri says, you are the universe, a collection of worlds within worlds. Your brain is the most complicated and amazing device in existence. Through the action of 100 billion nerve cells, you are capable. Okay, so I'm not seeing the red. You are capable. Okay, so yeah, I mean, all of us represent the potentiality of the divine to recognize itself, to be conscious of itself, to then contribute to itself. Um, you know, so anyway, um, so reading on now, I'm on page 95 of this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Ars. I'm sorry, I am having an allergic reaction to something in our atmosphere the last couple of days. I don't know what it is, but it's affecting my throat, so I'll go on as long as I can. Yeah. Yeah, let me read on what Cherie says here. You are the universe, a collection of worlds within worlds. Your brain is the most complicated and amazing device in existence. Through the action of 100 billion nerve cells, you are capable of art, music, science, philosophy, and war. And Richard says, the making of the monad. And Archifanes says, primarily war. Yeah, it seems we have a lot of war right now. Um, but this too will pass, as it always has and it always must. I'm not saying everybody will live through it, though. All human beings, that is. Oh, God. It's so much nicer when I have uh, Jordan with me to help push me along on these mornings, because I find myself hypnotizing myself, and and then that kind of puts me to sleep, which is not a good thing when you're trying to operate a YouTube channel. Okay. So it is not difficult to see in these themes a harbinger of Jung's later conception of the individual's primal form. During a late illness, his doctor appeared to Jung in his primal form as the Basilucius of Kos, an avatar of Kos. the temporal embodiment of the primal form, which has existed from the beginning. As humanity's healing emissary, the doctor was to summon to summon Jung back to Earth's demands. He was to die on the day Jung left his sickbed, in a mysterious commerce between life recovered and life lost, one Jung never explained. But the imagery of the event is clearly of an energy, like the eternal self, as the underlying truth of the individual, seeking its realization in time, to be fully attained only in its eternal reality. Jung claims to have witnessed something like these events only once, only once more. After her death, Jung's wife appeared to him in her primal or objective truth, became emotion and projection, dressed up as an intimate portrait that took Jung back through the particular moments of their life together to the deepest meaning running through it all. Her whole life had been guided by her deeper truth, and now she stood in its eternal realization as fully her own. To illustrate the many sides of life in the world beyond, Jung would later note that on the one occasion he woke to the realization that he had spent a day with his wife after her death, and that she had contained in death, uh, or had continued in death, um, to work on her Grail project, as if still to complete herself. It would appear that the attainment of the primal form and some kind of continued development are now incompatible in the world from which the dead in Liber Novus return. Okay. Um, this is uh, for my regular followers that are watching this, you know that I can easily be hypnotized. I'm very susceptible to it, and I find myself being hypnotized now, and it's great to have somebody on Zoom with me, to have banter back and forth, so that I don't go, which sometimes happens. And so I apologize that that may be happening here. Um, let's see. So Sheree says your capacity for compassion, affection, and dedication coexist with aggression, hatred, and murder. You are the most frustrating riddle ever written, a mystery at time even to yourself, a mystery at times even to yourself. Yep. We human beings are certainly a mystery, uh, even to ourselves. And sorry, I might have inadvertently stopped the video for a few moments. And anyway, okay, so we're all mysteries to ourselves, and we live in mystery. Um, and we have to get away from this idea that we can slice and dice everything and therefore understand everything we need to know. Okay, that's a problem we have with education right now, and it's a serious, serious flaw, and we have to start thinking of things in different ways than what has been done. Um, Okay, so from the perspective of life's meaning as self-affirmation, the figure of Christ can be seen as a proto-individual because he represents for Jung the man who lived out his individual truth, even to the cruel death imposed by Abraxas. In his later work, Jung describes Jesus as a principium individuationis. In the earlier Liber Novus, Jung postulates we should not bear Christ as he is unbearable, but we should be Christ. To be a Christ as distinct from being a Christian means that the individuation or that the individual realizes he or she must imitate and emulate no one. Christ lived out his life wholly faithful to his essential truth. Jung confesses that he himself had been a Christian, but not a Christ. Imitators of Christ are thus indicted. They have imitated it in the life of Christ, but they have not lived their own lives as you would have lived yours. Everyone would have to take their own life into their own hands, faithful to their own essence and their own love. Here, the premonition of the self becomes the individual essence and the basis of true love. Okay. So, all right. See how much further this goes. It goes a ways. Okay, not too bad. I think we may be able to get through it today if I can stay awake, and I will try to do that. Okay, the image of a life lived beyond emulation or imitation, out of the depths of one's continuity with the pleroma, is indeed enticing. It draws attention to several attributes of the Christ figure, not prominent in more traditional depictions. It gives a priority to an inner relationship as the experiential substance not only of Christianity, but of all religions. The point reappears later in Jung's insistence that the initial approach of the divine to the human is always from within. It also strongly suggests that reliance on the interior life beyond imitation or emulation carries with it a greater uh, sympathetic or compassionate embrace of all that lies beyond such profound interiority. The journey inward is also the journey outward. In reflecting the relation of religion to the psychic laws that control historical development, Jung will assert that Christianity's initial one-sidedness would eventually demand its own transcendence. The unqualified goodness of Christ split the figure from its own opposite, Satan, who became the dark brother of Christ. In his work after the Red Book, Jung refers to the split as the fatality inherent in the Christian disposition itself, which leads inevitably to a reversal of spirit, not through the obscure workings of chance, but in accordance with psychological law. This side of Jung's Jungian psychology points to the presence of an operating philosophy of history in which the archetypal basis of consciousness seeks its full realization in historical consciousness with a truly Hegelian necessity. From this passage, Jung goes on to locate the inevitable reversal of Christian one-sidedness in the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. Richard says education should be dynamic. Uh, Sony schools in the Buffalo, New York area are run down, but we are building a multi-million-dollar football stadium. Yeah. Yeah, we're that was done in my time in Buffalo as well, with what was then called Rich Stadium. Um, and I guess the way I've come to think about it is that all sports, especially in the United States, it's American football, but in much of the world, it's soccer and cricket. And actually, cricket is the second most active sport in the world. Um, although Americans are starting to dabble in it with a professional league this year. Um, but in any case, let's see. Oh, here's Kathy. Hi, Kathy. Thank you for saving me. I needed someone here to push me along. um, so what I was saying about the stadium was that we have a lot of un I guess undifferentiated testosterone in society, and that's always been the case. Masculinity is um, out of the park, and so society needs a way to absorb all that energy um, without it having us just be at constant war with everybody else. And so, um, certainly the Romans, and I think there were some examples before the Romans, discovered that they could expend some of that um, testosterone style energy by having um, gladiators and coliseums and so on. And so, although I used to um, get upset with sports, I understand it for what it is. That if we didn't have those ways to expend um, societal masculinity, things would be a lot worse for women, and acknowledging that they're pretty bad now, but they have been even worse in the past, I suspect. And so, as part of culture, I think that athletics is a good thing to have in society. That's a personal opinion. Um, and so anyway, you can certainly chime in here, Kathy, if you like.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You were pleading for company, so not that I can,
Yes.
I don't have any great contribution, but I can offer you company.
That can help. It's having someone to actually
I
talk
do
to.
have a question that
Yeah.
might also help in regard to focus is like remind me slash us what you are reading and what is the significance of it. It must be important to you that you are reading it. So if you could give, a newbie like me a synopsis of what and why for the reading today.
Okay. So I normally say this in the course, and thank you for reminding me, and I'll say it again. I normally do say it in the course of the class at least once, which is we are reading Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. Now, this is really the brainchild of Thomas Arst, who was my dear friend. And Thomas realized that there was there were a lot of facets to the Red Book that most people just didn't get. Okay. And in fact, um, I know of Jungian analysts who've never read the Red Book. Okay. People who are Jungian analysts and they've never read the book in 40 years of practice. I think that's harder to do today. But when the Red Book first came out, they said, "Oh God, why do we have to have this? This is Jung's private um, psychological stuff, and we don't need to have this out in public." But like um, like the life of Christ, I think we have to have examples in order to live a better life. Okay. And so as Jung had it, that the example of Christ is to demonstrate to us the beauty of suffering, because we all suffer, and we all have to have a hook on which we can hang our suffering and not let it destroy us. Okay, we all suffer, and some of us more than others, but we all have things happen in our lives that cause suffering. At the very minimum, the loss of parents, or the loss of a child, or the loss of a sibling, and that would be at the very minimal level. But so for Jung, what Jung has done is point out to us the importance of this inner life, okay? And that this inner life is not entirely what the Bible says, okay? In other words, uh, okay, religions have been dealing with the inner life since time immemorial, and pulling that out into the public. Okay, when the first and second temples of Solomon were built by the Jews starting in about 1100 AD, or I'm sorry, BCE, 1100 BCE, so more than 3,000 years ago. Um, the Jews were making a physical representation of something that is um, at least people with wisdom knew was a representation of the inner life, but but the temple itself was not the inner life. It was a way to understand the inner life, the suffering, the beauty of suffering. And so if we look at the cathedrals of Europe, for example, or any cathedral, they took 100 years to create. Okay, at least 100 years, and um, and for the people who worked on them in the early stages, they would never see the end product of that cathedral, but it gave them a way of expressing their inner life and their feeling of God. Um, and you know, I think we postmodern humans, um, humans tend to dismiss the importance of that work. And we saw that with Notre Dame in Paris, where for decades the fathers who ran Notre Dame could not get $1 million a year from the French government in order to keep Notre Dame up, keep its quality up, and keep its beauty up. And so, it was all covered with soot from hundreds of years of smoke, or candles burning in the sanctuary, you name it. All kinds of egregious things happened. And but when Notre Dame burned down, I know my own experience. I'm not a Catholic, but my own experience was that I wept uncontrollably for 8 minutes. And then when I tried to speak about it in a class, in one of these classes, my Monday night class, I believe it was, um, I found I could not speak about it. And so I printed out photographs that were online and just held them up. And I simply wept. I weep even thinking about it. It was such a numinous, special moment that I was holding up pieces of paper that shortly before were just white plain bond paper in my copier. And they printed out an image of something that was happening on the other side of the world. And I could hold it up and I could simply weep for all to see. And everybody knew what I meant because we all felt it, okay, in some way. Um, and the result of that was that Mr. Macron was able to get, I think, $1 billion ultimately, not $1 million, which the fathers have been unable to get from the French government, but $1 billion to invest in Notre Dame, partially because it has to do with the economy and the French culture. Um, and so tourists coming to France spend a lot more money on restaurants and hotels than they do in the collection plate at Notre Dame, no matter how much they appreciated it. Um, but it was essential to what we as humans have built up over millions of years. Um, and it couldn't be left behind. Um, and well, this,
Yeah, I think it's. I remember you being very touched by that. I remember sending you an email the second I heard that they were going to be, I think it was when they were going to be reopening and inviting people to come again after doing their restoration and refurbishments after the efforts, right? And what I think is really neat is the shared experience of humanity, of simply being moved, that we're
yeah,
all moved by, different and very particular things to us. And sometimes we surprise ourselves by the things that move us, and we didn't know, like, wow, like if you were randomly coming upon, Notre Dame, and then the fire touched your heart, but you didn't have any connection to it, but it blew you apart and cracked you open and broke you, if you were that person, I know you were highly aware of it before and probably had your reasons, personal reasons for being so moved.
right.
Um, but that happens too, where things will just break you and crack you open, and the proverbial you, us,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Me,
and then
and
you have to see that it's all built up in humanity. It isn't
right,
just us living
No,
alone. It's in the
that's
collective.
exactly where I was going. Was it is exactly the collective, and it's the collective uh thoughts that go toward and into something like that. It's the collective of over an entire century of builders and their families and their communities and their lives and deaths and wives and children, and everything, their religion, their beliefs, their whatever, their indentured enslavements, whatever it was, their piousness, their whatever it was, right? Just all the stories have so
Yeah,
much energy,
sure.
and
And,
we're such a powerful essence as a collective, right? That, or even as individuals, that when you create a collective around anything,
yeah,
it's gonna pack a punch.
sure,
And that's what I
sure.
appreciate about things like, whether it's Jungian studies or Buddhist focus studies, or Christian studies, or whatever, that people might find themselves collectively interested in, that, and then tie it together with, like you said, so many, abrasive wars going on right now,
Yeah,
as a dichotomy to some of the good collective, that those collective kind of experiences, in contrast to people that want to hold a pocket and a big old pods for good collective, energies and efforts. What I find really interesting right now about all of it is how everything is being amplified, but we're still putting up with the bully on the playground,
yeah,
somehow playing, and entertaining it, rather than just putting our hands on our hips as stern mamas and papas and saying, we're above this and we don't play this way anymore, and we're not contributing to it with dollars or energy or whatever. But starting in places like this, with you,
yeah,
that we don't have to come together and argue about anything. I'm not here for a Bible thumping.
yeah,
I'm not here as a Jungian zealot. I'm just here as, just little me, and, enjoying the company of you all. And
right,
for me, that's enough. Like, I guess that's really kind of like my finishing point. The glaze on my pot is that, for me, that's enough. The seeking is,
right. And
when we just share, when does seeking become the sharing of just being?
right. And so I want to draw everybody's attention back to the eternal moment. Um, and I'm going to put it up on the screen as I read it here in a moment, but I keep it on my desk facing me to constantly remind me um, of the eternal moment. And so I'm going to share it for those whose memory may be not quite the same. Um, I have to get back to my YouTube here or my Zoom. Okay, so anyway, this is the eternal moment. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize that you have missed the best part of life, you have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. Um, One should take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future. For the future always grows out of that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. Okay. Um, so I'll get off my um, soapbox about this, but all of this, um, has built up to this moment, not the moment of the burning of Notre Dame several years ago, almost a decade ago now, but but everything that human beings ever do builds our species and, God's plan up from the nothing that it was 13.8 billion years ago. Okay, everything. Okay. And,
So
the
true, Skip. I have a personal credo.
yes.
Everything matters.
Yeah, everything matters. Yeah,
Everything matters. Everything we do makes a difference. Everything we do creates a ripple. None of it is insignificant. We
right.
should never take our conscience and our actions and our hearts lightly,
Right.
ever.
And my students often ask me, um, is this graded? Is what we're doing today in class graded? As if, if it's not going to be graded, then I can blow it off.
Yeah,
And I
are they going to
said,
be held accountability, right? Am I going to be
right.
accountable?
And I always tell them everything is graded. Everything you do in life is graded. And, it doesn't matter whether you give $1 to a poor person who's homeless or um, build the Taj Mahal or the temple uh, in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter. Everything is graded, and you feel it in your life. Okay,
Are you teaching them to grade their own behavior? I'm just curious.
we try to when
You know,
when
like in
when they
those
will
moments
listen.
when they ask you that, it's a great opportunity to use that language with them and for them, on them, and
Right.
be like, "Yeah, I mean, I believe like everything is," and also like, "How would you grade it yourself?" And
Yeah.
just ask them, with cute curiosity and see what comes up. Because at the end of the day, if they don't want their own approval, none of it matters.
Yeah. Well, and these are beings that are still young and
Right.
haven't
I mean,
had
that's
the
why they need a why. That's why I'm always
right,
curious about
right,
like
right,
what techniques do you try on them,
right. So, coming back around to your question, though, why are we reading this book, which was the brainstorm of Thomas Arst? Okay, he recruited Murray Stein into backing this project, but it was really Thomas Arst's project. And it was not even a Jungian analyst. He has a PhD in physics from Princeton, or had. He unfortunately he died on the first Easter Sunday of COVID at the age of 65, and that was a tremendous loss to me in many ways. Because I was scheduled to go to the Aranos conference that year at his invitation. And the fact that he died and the Aranos conference didn't even happen for a couple of years. And, um, I lost all the money that I had invested to go to the conference because of COVID. And, it just was a phenomenal loss, both personally um, and financially. Um, but the point that his point was that there's so much more to what the Red Book is and means. We could never define it. And Dr. Jung spent 15 years writing the Red Book and having these experiences. Most of the experiences, 80% of the experiences in the Red Book happened in 6 weeks, or no, 10 weeks. Okay, between Christmas Day, 1913, and about the middle of March, 1914, 80% of the visions that are recorded in the Red Book happened in that 10-week period. And it was what caused Dr. Jung to realize the existence of the collective unconscious, because those visions were coming through him, but they were representative of everybody in Europe, basically. And they happened right up to late in July of 1914. And of course, World War One became the manifestation of what was happening psychologically um, as a result. And our current president is a manifestation of what has happened psychologically in the United States over the last 50 years, let's say. And so um, we, we wanted to deny it. We wanted to um, hold it back, but it was not to be held back, as January 6th proved. Um, and so, anyway, Dr. Jung then, over the next 15 years, took his black books that he created during that period, and he um, created a work of art, which is the Red Book, the folio version of the Red Book. And, what I have in front of me here is the reader's edition of the Red Book that doesn't have all of the paintings that Jung did, but his paintings are part and parcel of it, and they're in the folio version. And if you can at all, you should get yourself a copy of the folio version, but at least read the stories that are in the reader's edition. And so, Tom, there's a video online of Murray Stein from about 2016, in which he's asked about the Red Book, and he says, "Oh, okay, we've finished with the Red Book. The Red Book came out in 2009, and by 2016, lots of people had written about the Red Book, both pro and con. And by 2016, Murray Stein says, "Oh, we're done with it. Everybody's talked about it. We've done what we all can do about it, and that's it. That's it." Well, that's not true at all. Okay, and
Yeah, that's crazy. That's like saying, we're done talking about Frankenstein and we're never talking about Dracula again. And no,
right.
don't bring up Dickens and stop it right now and Beethoven and everybody, knock it off.
Yeah, let's forget about Mozart, and so but that was his attitude, and it was rather a derisive attitude, and it's right online. You can see the video in which he appears. And Thomas went to Murray, who's one of the leading writers on Jungian psychology in the world and has been for 40 years. And indeed, his collected works are now being published by Chiron Publications. And and so I owe a lot to Murray Stein for helping me understand what Jung was all about. He was one of the main people that I read along with Edward Edinger and others. And but Thomas Thomas's point was, there's a lot more here. There's a lot more here that we're not getting. And you can think of the movie Cosmos as an example.
I
Okay.
didn't see that one.
Okay, well, Cosmos is a brilliant movie. I've seen it maybe 25 times, but it begins um, with a realization that there's a message coming from outer space. and it's being received at Arecibo and other radio telescopes. And at first, um, at first, it appears to be just images, and the images that came back had come through uh, the radio telescope are images of Adolf Hitler at the Olympic Games in 1936. And there's first a realization that these are our images, that they're being played back to us. And and there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, but it's just another consciousness communicating back to us that, yeah, we heard you, and this is what we heard. And these were the first images that have been broadcast into the ether here on Earth. And yet there was a lot more to this than just the images. And a blind person um, realizes that there's a lot more to it than just the images being coming back. And so he takes the two-dimensional image and turns it on its side, and then there's structure underneath each pixel. And that leads um, to a numinous experience that Jodie Foster has ultimately. Um, and I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, or nor belabor it for those who have. But if you haven't seen Cosmos, I really urge you to do so. Okay.
Sounds like one of those experiences that gives you a whole nother, perspective, kind of like when I saw the Truman Show.
Well, and it had its origins in a novel that was written by Carl Sagan.
Yeah,
However,
sounds like it.
however, Carl
Uh-huh.
Sagan was one of these scientists who poo-pooed everything that
Mm.
that wasn't logical. Okay, and so his last book was poo-pooing, um, witches and goblins in the forest or something like that. That was his last book, and his last interview shows his derisive attitude toward that. But Carl Sagan was married to Anne Druyan, and Anne Druyan understood what we're talking about here. And she took his novel and gave it an ending that expresses um, what we're talking about here.
And
And
in alignment with that, it's the people who were around Jung,
yeah,
like Marie von Franz, if I'm saying her
mhm,
name right, and his other closest companions, including his wife and colleagues or student, whoever he was actually vulnerable with.
right,
I really appreciate hearing from those people because when people that come after the history of, like we have come way after, Jung himself, I think, it's like tread lightly, like everything that we say is opinion.
right,
Uh,
exactly, surely.
all of the scholars and all of the, years or lives spent, mastering somebody else's life, like that's the kind of joiner I'm not.
Yeah,
Even though like I guess as close as I've come is being really fascinated with Joseph Hubertus Pilates because I've taught Pilates for,
mhm,
25 years.
yeah,
And Pilates is, a big paradigm for me.
hmm,
But when I see the videos of Marie von Franz, I am so entranced by her interviews. when she's being interviewed. I just find so much richness in that material because you can feel the emotion of her relationship with Carl Jung. I mean, we all
Yeah,
know
yeah,
it
sure.
was really deep and a lot for both of them,
Yeah,
and and what who really, but what all. But yeah, those are the opinions I really
right.
really
And
love to
so,
hear.
so,
Cherie's asking who Cherie wants to know who Paul Tillich was.
well, Paul Tillich
Tillich,
was a
excuse me.
religious writer. I think he was the pastor of Riverside Church in New York. I'm not sure about
Mm,
that, but anyway, he's a renowned Christian writer uh,
okay.
of quite note. But anyway, going back to Jung and
Yeah.
why we're reading these books, because
Hmm.
there's five of them, and we haven't scratched the surface yet. But in any case. Um,
There's
Jung, in his time, Jung knew it's something like Cosmos. What Anne Druyan did, what she saw in Carl Sagan's work, was probably something that was well beyond even what Carl Sagan understood at the time of his death. Okay. But she saw something very powerful there. And she created it into something that became, a great movie and an important movie. And and so what Thomas R. said is okay. Well, first of all, Jung himself was not sure that he should publish the Red Book. Okay, so at his death, he didn't publish it. And when people asked him about it, he said, "Who would understand it?" At the time of his death, which was 1961, he said, "Who would understand it?"
Yeah, be like
And
telling someone your biggest fever dream, right?
right, exactly. And so finally, uh, Sonu Shamdasani um, convinced the family. It took him 13 years to convince the family and to put the Red Book together. 13 years, but he knew that there were copies of the Red Book, um, or major parts of it, in the Yale Library in the rare book room and a few other places around
Oh,
the
I
world.
never heard that before in your
Yeah,
classes.
well, that's what finally got the family going, because
Mm.
Shamdasani said, "Look, this is all going to come out sooner or later anyway. Let's do a really wonderful job on it." And every one of these videos that I've done for the last 8 years, 9 years now, um, has in it a link to the moment that they opened the Red Book. The publisher opened the Red Book to see what it was. It's a 3.5 minute video. I urge everyone to take a look at that video. And you could look at any of the videos, look at the captions, etc., of any video that I've published in the last 8, 9 years, and you'll see a link to that video, which is an amazing video in its own right, because it seems like it's an hour long, but it's only 3.5 minutes long. And so the point that I'm making, even Carl Jung, at the time of his death, wasn't sure this should be published yet. And the people who are and were the plain vanilla Jungian analysts, not that any Jungian analyst is plain vanilla, but the Jungian analysts who make a living analyzing people, didn't want to say too much because it's their red bread and butter. And many of them did not know about the Red Book. And as I said, going back, you know, 10 years, there were many who had not read the Red Book even after it was published. Okay, they felt it was Jung's empty frets, and so they didn't want to publish it. But it took others, Thomas Sars being a PhD in physics, to see the value of the book to all of us. And so it's for that reason, and this has been a 45-minute answer to your question, Kathy. That's why we're looking at these essays, because every one of them is, again, they're mostly by Jungian analysts. There's a few exceptions, but most are Jungian analysts who said, yeah, I know of a facet about the Red Book that nobody's really thinking about. And so over a 5-year period, 70 of those people submitted essays. We're going through one of them now by John Doorley, who was a Catholic priest, who tells us about his perspective, the facet that he understands about the Red Book. And so if you read all these books, you'll start to see the significance of the Red Book. It's like when that moment in Cosmos when the image gets turned on its side and you see that there's a lot more under every pixel of the picture. Um, there's just a lot. And the Red Book, like the Bible, I suppose, or any other major work, is immortal. And Jung was already immortal, but the Red Book makes him truly immortal because it allows us to see into what he was thinking about and his insight, especially into the collective unconscious, but also into the significance of every religion on earth. Okay. And and so it's just that's a long story. Did I somehow sum it up though in the end?
Yeah, yeah, you did. I think that's I have a much better at present view of what you are sharing with us. And you said that there are 5 of those books as
Yeah, they're
examples,
5 volumes.
like
Pardon?
the one you held up.
They all look exactly like this, except
And how many pages is it?
well, this one is volume two. And volume two is, wait a minute, it's 388 pages
Okay, and
plus
they're all volumes of essays by various.
by various people.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Obviously huh?
That's impressive.
Yeah. And so they all look at the Red Book from a different perspective.
Mhm.
And it's again the reason I started with Notre Dame is we don't know how important something is to us. Why would I weep uncontrollably at the fire at Notre Dame? Why would that happen? And you can find that video on this YouTube channel. Just look up the date and you can easily find it. And so and the reason is that, and I don't know the reason, okay? It's deep, deep in my psyche. Okay, it's very deep in my psyche. I can't tell you definitively all the reasons why I was weeping uncontrollably, but there's no doubt that I was, okay, because I did it right online. There's video. and and I'm not a Catholic. I'm not a Frenchman. Um,
Sorry,
you know,
that's funny.
in some ways, it's no loss to me. I visited the cathedral twice before it burned, and
Oh, I
I
think there's something really deep though about art and architecture that is very, very moving. There's something about a profound creation that can just grab you.
yeah, and the funny thing is, I was not moved when I physically went there. Okay, I went there
Uh-huh.
twice. I went there twice,
Right.
and I
But
was not
you were
particularly
moved.
moved.
Yeah, but the fire really it cracked you.
Yeah, and so so
Uh-huh.
Jung's Red book is like that for me. Okay. And it's for that reason that I've now read it, I think, 3 times online. You can find my readings of the Red Book. Um,
Yeah, you're a Jungian deep diver.
right. And I've been doing it now since 1987, so I have some experience with it long before the Red Book came out. But anyway, let's see. I guess we need to go on. And um, are you
Yeah,
still
yeah,
are you
yeah.
still
I'm here.
there? Can you just talk about something while I take a bio break?
Sure.
I will be right back.
Sure I can. This is my chance to head a mutiny. I'm kidding. To show loyalty and support. So Deborah says it's worthwhile considering how much of our experience is a manifestation of our own psyche and the context of the wider collective unconscious. It is surely an interaction. Cherie says yes. And Deborah says, like, I have a stalker. He lives in my street. To me, it's a challenge to not be freaked out. He's very maladjusted. At the same time, he's product of his misogynist background. He's very primitive. Are you speaking metaphorically or literally? Because I might be missing something here. And you go on to say, so his background is Greek, but his view of women is they should be available to him, and he finds my presence a provocation. There's a lot of projection going on there. My grandmother was in the French Resistance. This is still Deborah. I grew up on her stories. I've always hated Gothic text. Oh, that's interesting. Then discovered the edicts of the Germans were issued in Gothic text. That's chilling. Cherie asks, what did Plato describe about the chariot? Cherie, I don't know. Is that in context to this, or are you wanting to lead to sharing something? And Deborah says, to me, this is fascinating. Yes. Share more when you all share in chat. Make sure you're specific and that you share as though none of the rest of us in chat know what you're talking about. Um, so that we can follow and give you due interaction and appreciation for your chat contribution. Yes, Deborah says, to me, there is inherited memory. Yes, Deborah, the memory of our direct lineage ancestors, which is a whole nother slice of the pie, isn't it? Of
Oh,
the
sure.
collective conscious and unconsciousness, because whether you're adopted or you were stolen from a kidnapper, stolen from your family, which a lot of native children
Yeah.
have been, and it's still going on. The scooping is still happening. No matter how young you lose your DNA, is what I'm trying to say. The connection is real. It's so deep. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
what you feel as, your DNA stalker or whatever, if that's what you were referring to. But yeah, the inherited memories are deep. And when you get an epiphany, like your epiphany that the Germans that the there was a discovery that the edicts of the Germans were issued in Gothic text, and you have never cared for Gothic text, and
Hmm.
that blew your mind open as to why you would not care for that, but not know you didn't care for it. Yes.
Yeah.
And I have experiences, realizations all the time like that, and that is to me like what makes life meaningful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I agree with that entirely because uh, although the version of the eternal moment that I put up on the screen is in Gothic, because I was experimenting with calligraphy at the time, I now do not use it, and it's largely for that reason.
Oh,
Uh,
that's interesting. Oh my god.
yeah, I now use copperplate, which is much easier and quicker to do. And I've actually done a very special calligraphy uh, of the eternal moment, which I'm going to make available for sale at some point. Um, I'm going to give it as a Christmas present this year to all of my colleagues because they've come to expect it, which is quite an expensive um, hobby of mine. But um,
But you started it.
yeah, I started. It's my own fault, and so
No, it's
I
good.
wanted
It's
to do something that would be meaningful each year, and so
You're an
um,
artist and a giver, and it is meaningful.
right. Now, I did want to talk about one other thing, and that is the weeping. Okay, because a lot of people, men especially, think weeping is a feminine characteristic, and maybe it is. Okay, but my um, everything that I do here comes from my feminine side. Okay, it's not that I don't see myself as a man. Okay, I served 23 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, which, if anything in our armed forces, is a manly endeavor. And um, I wear a bracelet of a dragon, which is a symbol of masculinity, um, that my wife gave me for my birthday one year. And the symbol goes back to even very ancient Chinese times when um, the Chinese perceived that the dragon was fighting with the phoenix all the time, and the phoenix represents the feminine side. I happen to work at Phoenix Academy, so I know something is more about that most than most, perhaps. But um, I definitely acknowledge that everything I do on this YouTube channel comes from my feminine side. It does. And uh, and yet it's something that most men are cut off from, and we need to help them find a way back to it because when you have uh, the world as rigid as the people who depend on logic completely want it to be, you don't have a very nice world. And Winston Churchill was asked one time during the war why he was spending 55 million pounds on the British Museum, and he says, "Well, if we don't keep the British Museum going, then what are we fighting for?" if you just want the trains to run on time, you can let the Germans take over, right? Because their way of being in the world is much more masculine and military, at least up until the time of the war, um, than than other parts of the world. And so, you have to be sensitive to that. But anyway, so yes, like Jung, um, the Red Book begins with Jung's statement that he had to put aside all of his logic. And, we can call that, we can call it mansplaining. Men who are logicians love to explain things. And Jung said right at the beginning of the Red Book, and it bears repeating, so I'll repeat it now, um, that he had to put all that aside because there was something else in the universe, namely the feminine side. We all have a feminine side. Most of us just don't know it. Um, and so I'll read to you the first two paragraphs of the Red Book because this sets the tone for everything that I do and have ever done with respect to Jungian psychology. If I speak of the spirit of this time, I must say no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. Justification is superfluous to me, since I have no choice, but I must. I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, and my humanity still thinks this way, but that other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use, and meaning. Filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptuous spirit of this time, I long sought to hold that other spirit away from me. But I did not consider that the spirit of the depths from time immemorial and for all the future possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. I look away, I I took away he took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining and ordering things. And he let me devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produces the supreme meaning. And I guess I should read the supreme meaning here. Okay, so here's the supreme meaning, and it's in italics. But the supreme meaning is the path, the way, and the bridge to what is to come. That is the God yet to come. It is not the coming God himself, but his image, which appears in the supreme meaning. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the image of the supreme meaning. The supreme meaning is not a meaning and not an absurdity. It is image and force in one, magnificence and force together. The supreme meaning is the beginning and the end. It is the bridge of going across and fulfillment. The other gods died of their temporality, yet the supreme the supreme meaning never dies. It turns into meaning and then into absurdity. and out of the fire and blood of their collision, the supreme meaning rises up, rejuvenated and new. The image of God is has a shadow. The supreme meaning is real and casts a shadow. For what can be actual and corporeal and have no shadow? The shadow is nonsense. It lacks force and has no continued existence through itself. But nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. Like plants, so men also grow, some in the light, others in the shadows. There are many who need the shadows and not the light. The image of God throws a shadow that is just as great as itself. The supreme meaning is great and small. It is as wide as the space of the starry heaven and as narrow as the cell of the living body.
I love
So,
that. I loved that. I feel like that, like from the ineffable, we go into chaos if we try. If we try, we just lose our grasp on it. You know, if we try to,
right.
if we try to explain it, I don't know if that's what that means, but I just
Well,
feel, that's what I felt.
and the other piece of Jungian psychology that's critical is to know enantiodromia. And enantiodromia means the tendency of things to become their opposite.
Mm,
And so, um, we have seen it so many times in United States history. If you understand what enantiodromia means, for example, um, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Okay, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and the people that controlled the South and created Jim Crow um, were Democrats. Okay, Lester Maddox and George Wallace and those were all Democrats. Okay, but because of enantiodromia, what those people believed back in the 60s and 50s, okay, because I remember them from the 50s, Maddox, Lester Maddox, and so on, um, became Republican ideas, not Democrat. They became Republican ideas. And so if Abraham Lincoln were alive today, maybe he would be a Democrat. But I also see things swinging back the other way too. And so, as mourning as some of us are by the election of Donald Trump, I know that his way cannot succeed. There's much more to the American psyche than what he perceives with his shallow views. And so there will be a swing back. I don't know how long it will take, but I suspect not very long. So I do not I do not mourn for the country, which is certainly not dead, and certainly the American psyche is well and truly alive and well. Um, all right, so let's see. We have certainly wasted enough time, so we can't get to the end of this today. Um, and so I'll just tease this for the future. Uh, Maybe I better read a couple more paragraphs. Um,
I don't like the political trance.
the political trance of what?
Yeah, just I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm just throwing that out there while you're looking for your.
Yeah,
I'm just filling airtime. You know how you were saying earlier, like
yeah,
when you're
right.
alone, and you start talking about spiritual stuff, you go into a trance.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. This probably has nothing to do with anything, but like, I'm just wondering if the anima in you, when you go into your eros, trances you out, and the animus in me puts me into a trance when political hardcore toxic masculinity, for lack of a better term, stuff
Hmm.
comes up. I mean, I'm just like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And then, in the Jungian class, when it gets really politicky, I'm just like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna fall out of my
Yeah.
chair.
Yeah.
And just a little
Okay.
insight into my pea brain, the couple cells I have there.
Well, we all have a couple cells.
I know, right? But I
Um,
just think, yeah, the different trance out states, like what trances our friends out, what trances you out. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
all right. I'm going to read one page, and this may be repeating something that I read earlier because I've sort of lost my place now. But um, from the perspective of life's meaning as self-affirmation, the figure of Christ can be seen as the proto-individual because he represents for Jung the man who lived out his individual truth, even to the cruel death imposed by Braxis. In his later work, Jung describes Jesus as a principium individuationis. In the earlier Liber Novus, Jung postulates we should not bear Christ as he is unbearable, but we should be Christ's. To be a Christ is distinct from being a Christian, means that the individual realizes he or she must imitate or emulate no one. Christ lived out his life wholly faithful to his essential truth. Jung confesses that he himself had been a Christian, but not a Christ. Imitators of Christ are thus indicted. They have imitated it, the life of Christ, but they have not lived their own lives as you have lived yours. Everyone would have to take their own life into their own hands, faithful to their own essence and their own love. Here, the premonition of the self becomes the individual's essence and the basis of true love. The image of a life lived beyond emulation or imitation out of the depths of one's continuity with the pleroma is indeed enticing. It draws attention to several attributes of the Christ figure not prominent in more traditional depictions. It gives a priority to an inner relationship as the experiential substance not only of Christianity but of all religions. The point reappears later in Jung's insistence that the initial approach of the divine to the human is always from within. It also strongly suggests that reliance on the interior life beyond imitation or emulation carries with it a greater sympathetic or compassionate embrace of all that lies beyond such profound interiority. The journey inward is also the journey outward. In reflecting on the relation of religion to the psychic laws that control historical development, Jung will assert that Christianity's initial one-sidedness would eventually demand its own transcendence. The unqualified goodness of Christ split the figure from its own opposite, Satan, who became the dark brother of Christ. In his work after the Red Book, Jung refers to the split as the fatality inherent in the Christian disposition itself, which leads inevitably to the reversal of spirit, not through the obscure workings of chance, but in accordance with psychological law. This side of Jungian psychology points to the presence of an operating philosophy of history in which the archetypal basis of consciousness seeks its full realization in historical consciousness with a truly Hegelian necessity. From this passage, Jung goes on to locate the inevitable reversal of Christian one-sidedness in the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. Okay, I see I did read that, but I'm going to tease for next week. In the Red Book's description of the figure of Christ as living wholly out of his individualizing interiority to the point of death, Jung is anticipating a later foundational theme that divinity must express its totality beyond itself to be fully itself. Okay. So I'm going to start with that paragraph next week.
Cool.
And so this is June 1st.
Rabbit, rabbit.
What does that mean?
Oh, that's what we say on the first of every month for good luck.
Oh, we do. Okay, well,
Yes,
rabbit.
you open your eyes, and if you forget, it's okay. Some people think you should say it backwards if you don't say it right away, but I just say it.
So you said you rolled your eyes. Sorry, I looked down and I didn't see you roll
Oh,
your eyes.
what?
So I looked
No,
down.
no, no. I was talking about I was just talking about rabbit, rabbit. You're like, what does that mean? I was just rambling on about that. Thank you
Okay.
for everything today, Skip.
Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much
Okay,
because
good. You're welcome. Yeah.
and folks, by all means, if you want to join this discussion online, it will help me. And I try to do it a little bit with the YouTube chat, but it's not quite the same. And so I appreciate it when Kathy was willing to come online today and help me out. And
You're
and
welcome. It's fun.
yeah, and everybody is welcome. And I think it was something important that we discussed, which is why are we doing this? That's fair enough. And this is why I'm doing it. Um, I have to look, if I knew Jung in his lifetime and my lifetime, I'm not sure I would like him as an individual. I'm not sure I would. Um, and there are reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into, but
Because he was a scoundrel?
he was a scoundrel.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I think, in this group and, I mean, we're kind of like a well-known entity to each other. Most of us are anyway. We have the
Right.
occasional, new friend or old friends pop in, or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, I just think we should be honest with humor. Why not? It keeps us awake and it keeps us vulnerable and it
Yeah.
keeps us real. And
Well,
we're,
and a scoundrel I have been too. So I would
there you go.
it wouldn't be because of that I didn't like Jung.
Well, I will see your scoundrel with many self-wrought tragedies, my friend. I mean, come on. None of us are getting out clean.
Right. Okay. So,
Yeah, don't worry about it.
but anyway, um,
That's
as
embarrassing.
John Beebe once said, Jung has been my therapist, and that's why I'm here and why I've done this all these years, and I continue to do it. But anyway, peace, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you in 1 week. We only have 2 weeks left of school, thank God. Right.
You got this, Skip.
I hope so. You want to, before I leave, you want to see one picture of me at graduation?
Sure.
We did graduate our seniors this
Oh,
week.
how many?
7, total
Good
7.
job.
Yep.
That's
And
fantastic.
yeah, okay. So here's, let's see.
Let's see. Let's see teacher vibe.
Well, this is me. Um,
Good to meet you too, Deborah.
okay, wait a minute. Where is it here? Okay, this is me walking into the place on last Tuesday when we
Oh
grad
my gosh.
graduated.
I feel like I should stand up.
And
Look at
the
you.
the faculty, the administration bought robes for everyone. And I said, now wait a minute. If I'm going to have to wear a robe, then I'm going to wear my own regalia.
Okay.
And so I actually went out and sprung for the money, even though in my law school class, I have a Juris Doctor. In my law school class, we did not wear academic regalia, but this is what I have right now. Yeah,
Arcafane says skip pimping.
and you see the purple hood that I got from the State University of New York
Now you
at
look good.
Buffalo. And I'll show you one other picture.
You fill
This
that
is,
robe out good.
yeah,
Yeah.
here's one other one. This is, we work in a school where we can't get Americans to work.
What does that mean? You're an American?
I'm an American, but most people are afraid to work in our school. And
Oh, you know.
so we actually have to go overseas. And this gentleman is my colleague. He's a math teacher. And the administration bought robes for everybody so that everybody would have
Nice.
a robe. But I actually have my doctoral robe.
Yeah.
And behind us here, if you came to our confluence in 2023, Comasal Brown came to California with me, and he's the mural artist that did this mural, which is the
No
Phoenix, of
kidding.
course. Yeah.
Is that just a synchronicity or is there a connection that
Well, I met him when I worked at another school. Uh, I was working as the art teacher for 3 months,
oh,
and,
okay.
and
Fun.
he came to an open house thing and set up a table about his mural work. He does amazing mural work, and he goes
That's
by he
brilliant.
goes by the nickname of Cell Spitfire, and
Love
and
it.
but his true name is Comasal Brown, and he uh, he and I hit it off from that, and I said, "Would you come if I invited you to go to this event that we're going to have in California? Would you come?"
Mhm.
And he said, "Yes." So uh, I got him to come, and we
Cool.
had we had a good time. And
Your walking cane is quite nice.
my snake cane, that's
Yeah,
my
that's cool. And it's Year of the Wood Snake, so there you go.
yeah, and the um, the cane was made in Ukraine, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's deep.
So
Richard is appreciating that cinder block walls are not easy to paint on, and
yeah, for
Cherie said
sure.
that you were looking handsome.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next.